Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 69 of Buha's Block. I'm pleased to be joined today by Alan Sliwa of The Sliwa Show and Hoops Talk with Alan Sliwa on YouTube. Alan, first-time guest, long overdue. How you doing, my man? And
Yo,
congrats on being episode 69.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. I think you wanted me on 54, and I'm like, let's wait 15 more episodes. Just timing wise. Thank you for having me, buddy. I'm glad to be here, and looking forward to talking some Lakers basketball with you, bud.
Are you? Are you?
Here's why I am. I'll tell you why I am.
Okay. Yeah.
Because right now it's kind of one of those. I don't know how you are on the freeway. You're driving all around Southern California all the time. Sometimes when there's a car accident, and it could just be a very, just a bumper to bumper kind of accident. A lot of times, we say we're not going to look. We don't want to see what's going on. I think right now we're all looking. Everybody stopped on the freeway and saying, what the hell is going on with the Los Angeles Lakers? And we're just lined up car after car. Now, I didn't think 2 weeks ago we would be sitting in this position, but it's an interesting spot for this squad. So fair question of, do we really want to talk Lakers basketball? But that's part of our job. We got to do it.
Exactly. So let's get into it. Lakers have lost 6 of 8 games. They've lost 4 of those 6 games by 20 plus points.
Oof.
They've lost the second half of 3 of those 4 games by 20 plus points, including the second half in Miami last night. They're down 17 at halftime, down 33 going into the fourth quarter, and end up losing by 41 points. Worst loss of the season. One of the worst losses of the LeBron AD era, arguably the worst. One of the worst losses of the season, period, for any team. And I mean, there's so many places as we assess the car crash that is going on right now. I think we can look at the roster and the lack of changes going back to the offseason. I think we could look at the coaching, and clearly, I think JJ has done a solid job as a first-year head coach. On some level, the messaging is not getting through to the players, and he was talking about it last night, that he feels like there's basic stuff that they've gone over since the beginning of training camp that they've stopped doing, particularly defensively. But for me, it starts with the players, because regardless of what the roster looks like, regardless of what the game plan is on both sides of the ball, I think there needs to be a certain level of pride and competitiveness and care and effort. And that was not there last night in Miami. That has not been there for large stretches, particularly in the second halves of these losses. And for me, you could have Phil Jackson coaching this team, Greg Popovich coaching this team, Eric Spoelstra coaching this team, Pat Riley coaching this team. You could have, maybe if you had multiple All-Stars, it's a little bit of a different story. But like on some level, to me, it just comes down to the players are the ones not rotating, botching switches, not communicating on the floor defensively, not getting back in transition. And while I think there's a lot of blame to go around right now, and I'm certainly not absolving anybody else of any blame, I do think first and foremost, as LeBron said last night, as AD said last night, this starts with the players and them buying into the game plan, buying into the strategy and the adjustments, and just playing with a level of professionalism and a level of pride. That's the word I kind of keep coming back to, of like just some of those defensive breakdowns in the third quarter. It was like, do you guys even care? Are you guys even interested in being here tonight? So with that sort of preamble, like what's been the biggest thing that stood out to you, and what have you seen from the group on the floor, particularly the players?
Well, that's the part that's most discouraging, because I think in sports, whether you're a fan of NBA, NFL, Major, you're going to go through bad stretches. Losing, Lakers have lost 6 of their last 8 games. It's not the first time that's happened. It's not going to be the last time that's happened. I think the part that's most discouraging, think of the words that you were using to kind of describe what this team has been over the last couple of weeks: lack of professionalism, effort. I mean, things like that are supposed to just come. That comes day to day with whatever work that you do. That's not what we need. That's not what we're supposed to be talking about. JJ Redick shouldn't spend part of his presser yesterday mentioning those words. Braun should not be mentioning those words. Effort that's the last thing you should be worrying about. So for me, I think, when I say that's the thing that's most discouraging, JJ Redick has just started. He's 22 games in. The guy's going to get, in my opinion, I'm assuming here, at least a couple of years with the Lakers to see what kind of coach he is and everything else. But can we be 22 games in and the messaging isn't getting through? Like, that's the part to me that, well, why aren't some of these players hustling? Why is there a question about their professionalism? If you go right now on Twitter or go on X, and you know how it works. People are going to take clips and say, look at this clip from yesterday's game. And you watch 10, 15 seconds of it. It's like, what the hell are these guys doing? Or the way you described it, do they even care? I think the result of the game, put that to the side. I think losing a game, put that to the side. But the question marks we're having about the Lakers, this is kind of the last thing I thought 2 weeks ago before they lost that game to the Orlando Magic. Even after they lost to Orlando, it's like, all right, hit your free throws and you're about to be 11-4. It happens, move on. But Jovan, they're not just losing. It's how they're losing. It's poor effort. It's, up 10 against Denver to down 29. It's losing, against Phoenix. I think at one point they were down 30, and I want to say they lost the game by 27, 29, whatever it was. Then the Minnesota game by 29. They've lost 2 games in a row by a total of 70. And then last night was the worst of them all by 41 points against Miami. That's very concerning. And that has nothing to do with X's and O's. That has nothing to do with, well, if they just make this adjustment, if this guy starts and that guy comes off the bench. So that to me is the most discouraging. I think everybody's got blame. Definitely it should be on a lot of the players' shoulders. But if your head coach's message is not getting through, that really sucks for JJ, for him to start off his career and we're 22 games in and he's already having to deal with that.
Yeah, and I thought that it was a pretty damning quote last night that JJ said, I feel like we're not together right now, and we're not together in huddles. And like, for a coach to say that, like that I think it's clear that that's the case, right? Just based on the on-court results and based on the little bit we can see in terms of huddles and in terms of just the body language with the group. It's been really awful. And I like that there's no way around that, right? So that was a pretty damning quote to me that JJ said that. The one thing I said last night that I still stand by with some more time is, like, when you're in the eye of the storm, it always seems like it's the worst it's going to be, and it's never going to get any better. And I think that I would be shocked if this team doesn't win a basketball game again. Sure. It looks like this for the rest of the season, even if they don't end up making a trade, even if Vando doesn't come back. Like, I think things are going to get better. The schedule is going to get easier at some point, and they're going to have more home games. And like the Lakers are going to look better at some point, in the near future, I think. However, I also felt last night that I think it's time for some changes to be made. And I don't know if that's a change to the starting lineup again, and that would be the third time that they've made a significant change to the starting lineup. I don't know if it's a drastic change to the rotation. I think both short and long term, they really need to look at the trade market. And I know, I've reported, as have others, that they've kind of looked at January and into closer to the February 6th trade deadline as like a more realistic trade window. But I think they're in danger of the season's kind of teetering right now. And if they're not careful, this could get uglier. And they could, if they drop under 500 and we're in early January and this group is like 15 and 18, I don't know if that's a season worth saving at that point, at least in the front office and the organization's eyes. So for me, I think short term, like you can only control, if you're JJ and the coaching staff, like you can only control the lineups you're putting out there, obviously your scheme and your adjustments, but you got to get the guys to buy into that, which is its own challenge. And JJ talked about having a meeting with the players, meeting with the coaching staff, and then going to meet with individual players to kind of figure out what's going on here. But let's assume they do that. Let's assume that there is a level of pride and competitiveness that this group rebounds with. In terms of adjustments moving forward, we will get into the trade stuff a little bit later, but is there something with the starting lineup or the rotation? Like, it did stand out to me that for as good as Dalton Connect has been, and the last 3 games have been a little rough offensively, I don't like, he's a rookies go through ebbs and flows. I'm not concerned about him on that end, but he did get pulled 3 minutes into the third quarter. This is not the first time Dalton has been pulled immediately because of his defense. I thought Rui was particularly bad defensively last night. Now, he also shouldn't be guarding Tyler Hero for stretches, which is a testament to the Lakers' perimeter defense and the state of that right now. But I'm starting to get to the point where I kind of think that they probably need to change the starting lineup again. And I'm not quite sure what that looks like. Obviously, Austin's been out, so I think Austin coming back will help them whenever that happens. But in terms of adjustments in shorter term, longer term, big picture, small picture, whatever, what do you think can help them get out of this mess, aside from just getting back on the same page and trying harder?
I think small window for me, it is, can I identify 5 players that I know maximum effort when they're out on the floor? Let me throw one player out here, and this is kind of crazy how we are kind of playing. We're playing with so many different players just in the starting lineup, but Max Christie, I don't really have a question of whether Max Christie is going to give everything he's got, right? Like, I don't have, and he at least has been in the league long enough now in his 3rd year where he understands certain defensive schemes. He is a decent defender when he's out there. I'm looking for guys that just are interested in getting me stops. So if you told me Max Christie jumps into the starting lineup because of that, cool, no problem. But I think the ultimate question is going to be, when's Austin Reeves going to come back? Clearly, they need him in the starting lineup. The one thing that I want to give JJ Redick some credit for, he's not scared of making a move and worried about somebody's feelings. If I got to have D'Lo in the starting lineup, I'm going to have him. If I got to take him off the bench or bring him down to the bench, so because I need help from the bench, then I'm going to do that as well. I'm going to start Cam Reddish. I'm not going to start Cam Reddish. I think you're trying to find a crew that at least sends a message to everybody else. I'm going to reward those that look like they, there is a little bit of respect to the game, I guess you can call it. I don't know how long that can work for. I don't know if, what are you going to do? Start Cam Reddish and Max Christie and
Gabe Vincent.
Yeah, like what does that lineup look like? I'm sure LeBron and Anthony Davis are saying, yeah, we're going to need a little bit more talent in here. They're in a kind of an interesting position and predicament. But I'll also say this: how are they expected to win games when? I was looking at, I did my show this morning and kind of walking through Anthony Davis's stat line. Even if you got some of these players that are giving maximum effort, even if you're messing with the starting lineup, even if you're messing with all that, AD's had 20 points total in the last 2 games. I don't, and Jovan, you've been covering the team, and I know you're a fiend when it comes to the NBA. Looking at AD used to occasionally have this game where it's like, hey, where'd he go in the 4th quarter? How come you only took this many free throws? This is a stretch. I don't think it's a coincidence that this 2-6 stretch that they're on. Go look at Anthony Davis's numbers. He had the game against the Utah Jazz where I think he put up 30 plus, maybe 33, something like that. Everything else has been either way below average, an 8-point game, a 12-point game, a 15-point game. I think the bigger question to ask, other than some of these role players, AD and LeBron, that's your foundation. And what you're hoping for and what you almost expect, whether realistic or not, I think it's realistic, but I think every single game you walk into, you have to just assume I'm getting 30 from AD and 11 rebounds and 2 block shots. From LeBron, I'm getting 24, 7, and 7. And then I'm going to complain about everybody else because those two, that's just supposed to be what they do on a night in, night out basis. Bron went through a stretch where he had that 0 for 19 from the 3-point line, shooting below 45% from the field. He went through a really an odd stretch in his career. That hadn't happened often. We're looking at numbers that he had 20 years ago. And then obviously Anthony Davis's stretch, it's got to start with those two guys. I hated AD's body language yesterday. I hated his post-game presser. And I'm a huge fan of Anthony Davis. He seems like in any interaction I've had with him, such a nice dude, like such an easy guy to root for. But he looked defeated yesterday. That didn't look like a guy that was ready. Next time we come out and we got Atlanta tomorrow, I'm going to demolish whoever's in front of me. It's that part to me is concerning as well.
Definitely. And what I said last night, that it was jarring to me with the performance against Miami, was like, you mentioned he'll have these fourth quarters where maybe he gets like one or two shots, or these second halves where he has like 22-24 in the first half, and then he finishes with 28-30, and you're just like, where did AD go? And I think I talked about it a lot. Like, I think there's multiple factors that go into it. It's not just on AD. He's not the point guard of the team. If anything, they've kind of gone away from him having the ball as much as he did earlier in the season. So I think there's blame on the coaching staff, the ball handlers, and AD, in terms of like the blame pie with that. But there's always been a baseline level of defense with Anthony Davis that you can count on, where even if he's not getting the ball offensively, he's playing defensive player of the year caliber defense. And last night, to me, was arguably the worst defensive performance I've ever seen from Anthony Davis. Guys were just waltzing to the rim. The Lakers switch a lot, and he was not really getting out to contest guys. There was a bunch of miscommunication, and he's supposed to be the captain of the defense, the guy who's leading it from a communication standpoint. And I just thought, and he was focusing on the offensive end and kind of calling out his offense, which like I get, because that's the easy thing to look at in the box scores. You look at, okay, 8 points, back-to-back games, he set a season low in points. But to me, it was like the defense had fallen. Like, I don't know what was worse last night, honestly, because we could say 134 points for Miami. They hit 24 threes. Wow, I didn't even realize it was that high.
24. I thought, I don't know if they tied the franchise record or passed it, but yeah, 24 was a franchise
probably
record.
Was a franchise record, I would guess. But then LA scored 93. And the other thing that is really cratered during this stretch is in 6 of the 8 games, they've scored 6 of the 8 games during this stretch of losses, they've scored 104 points or fewer. And in 2024, you can kind of walk into a game and score 104 points. Like that's the league. That is like below, worse than the league type scoring. So it last night, I mean, for as bad as the defense was, I think the offense was arguably just as bad. I mean, they're in competition with one another for which one can be worse right now. But for me with AD, I was actually more disappointed in him on the offensive end, because like he talked about it a little bit of like, guys don't try and make mistakes. Like everyone is out there compete. Now, I don't know if I fully agree with everyone was out there competing last night, but in general, like guys don't try to miss layups, miss free throws, miss open threes. Like guys are trying to make those shots. So with AD, he's missed, like he missed a couple layups last night. He missed a couple bunnies. Like I'm not gonna necessarily hold that against them. I do think there's maybe a level of focus that wasn't there. But for me, it was just the defensive end. But let's touch on the trade stuff, and then
can I ask you a quick question? I'm
sure.
Curious on, because I don't know this, but I don't think there was an individual they were talking about. But yesterday when JJ and when you heard LeBron and they were talking about lack of professionalism, effort, do you feel like, and you're in that locker room after every single game, do you feel like there's a fracture somewhere? Because what was odd to me last night, and it's not that Lakers just lost one game by 41 and they've been playing great ball before and it was just a bad night. 2 weeks of a trend. That's a pretty good sample size of where this Lakers team is going, and they're not losing by a little bit. They're getting blown out. Do you think there's something else going on? Do you think there is some type of fracture? Can that even happen this early in the season? Do you feel like there's something more than just basketball?
It's a good question. I've been trying to kind of wrap my head around the situation and think a little bit deeper with it. I do think that there is some level of the messaging just not resonating with this group. And it feels like now this is my 5th season covering this team and 3 different coaches. It feels like when things get rough, this is a group that tends to fold. And the weird thing with that is like they have shown levels of resiliency. Like there's been previous Laker teams that have had stretches of like multiple 15, 20-point comebacks. And I also think in 2023 and 2024, they had those strong closes to the season after subpar starts for like the first 50, 55 games. So I don't want to say like they're incapable of being resilient, but I do think like when things get bad, they tend to be really bad.
Sure.
There tends to be shoulder slumping, bad body language, finger pointing, and a lack of accountability. And I think when you have the same thing going on with 3 different coaches, at some point you can't blame the coaches anymore. And
great point.
I think with JJ, like this is probably the earliest this has happened. Like I guess with Darvin the first year, but they had Russ and Pat Bev, and it was kind of like not a great situation. So I think like the Russ thing was kind of its own thing that I think was getting a little toxic. But aside from maybe that, this is I feel like as the worst body language I've seen from this group like this early in the season. Or at least a group that was supposed to be competitive, because you had like the last Vogel year that they had Russ again, but also like a bunch of injured old guys, beginning of the Darvin tenure. But then like since that point on, it's largely been like relatively positive body language unless they're playing Denver. But I would say, so I think that's a big thing. I also think, I don't want to make excuses, but I think we do have to acknowledge certain things. Like Austin has missed the last 3 games.
Yep.
He is their 3rd best player. And this is a group that does not have a lot of depth to begin with. They don't have a lot of top end starter, like high level rotation caliber players. So to be missing one of those guys, I think is a really big blow. Another thing is, I mean, like this has been a tough road trip, I think, from like even like this stretch, because they went Phoenix, San Antonio back to back home against OKC, then back on a 4 game road trip. So essentially you could make a case that you could include LA as almost its own road game within 2 separate road trips. And you're going across multiple time zones in multiple parts of the country. A lot of those flights, like they've been getting in at 3, 4 a.m. after a lot of these games, and they've had different weather stuff or delays and whatever. So I'm not trying to use that as an excuse. I just think that doesn't help, right? Like it's whether it's like makes it 5% tougher, 10% tougher, whatever, that they just kind of, that it's a cumulative thing. Like AD was talking about it last night. He feels like there's been a lot of things accumulating. Then you also have, I think, on some level, like the team has been looking forward to Jared Vanderbilt coming back. Right. And you get the update that he's out another month. And I think that, I'm sure on some level from a morale perspective is a bit of a blow. You also are you're without Vando, but also Jackson Hayes, Christian Wood. So this is also a group that I think even if healthy, we would have some concerns about the front court and the defensive capabilities and the size and the length. But then you're missing half of that group. And now you're relying on Christian Coloco, who I thought was pretty bad last night. Armel Traore, who plays hard, but is relatively raw from a skill perspective. Like right now, offensively, he's basically just shooting and missing open threes and then like grabbing some offensive rebounds, which has been helpful. But I think there's a combination here of just like the recent schedule has been tougher. They played better teams. They've been on the road. They've had some injuries that they've had. I think, but also to your point, like some fracturing, I think for sure. And it was just to hear JJ say they're not together and then that he doesn't want them to splinter any further, then to have AD say, we got to stick together. We can't keep separating. Like, I mean, I think that stuff is telling that, like, if anything, you know, people downplay it in the media. You're not really saying the full truth. So Yeah, I mean, there's clearly something is wrong. Like, there's no doubt about that. Like, they're not on the same page. Like, I think we can acknowledge that.
It's a good perspective to have because I think I'm with you. I don't think anyone at this stage wants to hear all of the excuses, but that's context. You need that context. You need the context of the opponents. You need the context of the travel. You need the context of guys that are missing. You need the context how if Austin Reeves is in that lineup, how much easier it probably makes a guy like Dalton Connect's life a little bit easier. You need that context. I think that's important. And I think the only thing that I'd walk away with is the questions about the effort is the only part that I'd sit back and say if they were just losing games because they're not good enough and they're not talented enough, but to see teams just running it up on them is obviously a little bit of a different story.
Yeah, it's felt like every team views it as an NBA Cup game that the point differential matters, and of course we've known like the teams always get up to play the Lakers. That's something that they've been pretty open about in the past. That they're aware that teams like playing them because they're the Lakers, and if you drop 30 plus against the Lakers, you're going to be on Sports Center and House of Highlights, and you're going to get some more attention. But that also means like they got to be aware of that, and they got to bring the requisite level of focus and whatnot. So let's get into, I asked people to submit listener and viewer questions for us to answer. And I think we got a couple here on trade front and various things. So first one from Fang Charlie 3702. What the heck is going on with the Lakers' energy these last few games? What the heck happened to the organization and the good stuff we were playing with? Does a trade fix it? So I will open that to you, Allen. Does a trade fix this situation? Is it multiple trades?
Yeah.
And what could that fix look like in terms of a position, a player archetype, etc.?
So I don't have an answer to kind of a question that I'm going to propose as well. When I said, is there a fracture there? If hypothetically the Lakers have a bad apple in that locker room, if there's somebody that's like, I don't care what JJ Redick is talking about. Hey, you know what? I'm going to do my own thing. You know what? I'm worried about myself. Then there could be kind of an addition by just getting rid of somebody that you don't feel like is helping your locker room. If you put that to the side, because that's its own separate problem, there's no real depth that the Lakers can depend on. That to me is, if LeBron, you and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, if LeBron and Anthony Davis are not playing what they need to play every single night, there is nobody else that can carry the load. There is nobody else that can come in and be like, hey, and if you look at some of the other teams around the NBA, and whether they're good examples or not, yes, the Celtics are probably the best team in the NBA. Go look at their depth. OKC, go look at their depth. They could lose Alex Caruso and Chet Holmgren and keep rolling and keep winning. Even teams that aren't exactly the greatest, but look at Minnesota, look at Dallas. There's a number of teams that are out there that are not just depending on two guys. The Lakers are depending on that. I know there's always been a conversation of trying to get help from a big perspective. Go out there. Can you get a guy like Jonas Valanciunas? Can you get a guy that can spread the floor a little bit, doesn't have to clog up the paint? Anthony Davis doesn't have to play that five all the time. But I think for me, I think if I was targeting one position, a wing that can play both sides of the ball, that is a real threat, that is a player that you can kind of clearly say that's probably the third best player on this team. And now Austin Reeves is he becomes more effective because he's not the third best player. And that just like all the way down the list helps out that depth. And this isn't me just targeting Rui Hachimura, but if they thought Rui could potentially be that player, he's too inconsistent. I don't know what Rui's going to give every single night. He might give you 16 points. He might give you 8, and you don't really feel his presence at all. They do need to make moves. They need to make at least a move, but they also, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a couple moves that are made. But I'll go back to what I said in the beginning. If they're having locker room issues, and if there's not everybody's pulling the rope in the same direction, just that alone can fracture a team. And that has less to do with talent. That just has more to do with everybody's, in it to win it. Everybody's in it with the right circumstances or purposes. The last thing I'll say to that, I thought you brought up a really, really good point earlier in the show. By the time you get to January 1st or January 15th, are they in a position where, hey, is it worth making a trade? Hey, are we giving up 2 first rounders when Braun is 40 and we're in 11th place in the Western Conference? Like, is that the smart thing to do? I didn't think we'd be having a conversation about that. I really actually thought, I thought the as the Lakers were playing some really good basketball, I thought it was going to put good pressure on Rob Pelinka to say, I got to go improve this team even more because I like the squad that we have, and we are a player or two away. But that question that you brought up, I would have never thought of 2 weeks ago, that I think is becoming the next 30 days is going to say a lot.
And that was honestly my fear dating back to the offseason. And that was why I was a vocal proponent for them making a move. Because I did kind of feel like they probably had to make 2 moves. But if you made 1 move in the offseason and then kept one of the picks maybe into the season to kind of evaluate, okay, who's healthy, who's playing well, like what is the identity of this group, what is the ideal rotation, and who are the guys that are expendable that we can trade. Now we have another pick to play with. But yeah, I mean, I think that they're potentially getting to a point where if we're at Christmas, they got I haven't even touched on it on my show yet, but they got pretty screwed with their NBA Cup edition of 2 games. They get at Minnesota and home versus Memphis, who is finally starting to get healthy and playing pretty well. Then one of the best teams in the West in Memphis. And we know that there's some history there with them and the Lakers, and they always get up for that game. So they could, and Atlanta has won 5 games in a row.
They look good all of a sudden. Sure.
So they've looked good. They've also beaten the Lakers a couple times recently in Atlanta. So you're looking at it and you're like, you got that. They do play
coming
Portland
up, I
on
think,
Sunday.
against Sacramento on the road.
Yeah, so they play Portland, which should be a win, and maybe a trade preview or an evaluation of Jeremy Grant, Robert Williams, etc. But then you got the Minnesota and Memphis games. Then you got the back-to-back or 2 baseball series style road games in Sacramento, which has been a difficult matchup for LA, even though they beat them earlier in the season. Then I think they come back for a Pistons game, which the Pistons are pesky. Then they go to Golden State for Christmas, and we know that it's going to be a big game. Steph, LeBron, Lakers, Warriors, Christmas Day,
That's
Warriors
a tough
are playing
schedule.
pretty well.
I actually did not look that far out. That the way you just laid it out right there, you might say there's 1 or 2 layups on that schedule. Everything else is going to be competitive. And I'm adding the layup of a team that already beat the Lakers and the Pistons. But I'm just looking at
Portland and Detroit. They should beat those 2 teams, and then
every other one of those games are tough.
Is losable, yeah. So to quickly touch on the trade stuff, those who listen kind of know my stance on this. I think they should try to make a move, at least 1, if not 2. They should try to do it as soon as possible. Obviously, a guy like Jonas Valanciunas isn't even available to be traded yet until December 15th. So there are some restrictions in terms of December 15th, January 15th, which guys are available. The 5 names that I have really liked that I feel like are semi-realistic are guys that the Lakers have been attached to in the past, that they've had interest in the past and even the recent past, that is early as the preseason or early in the season, are Walker Kessler, Jeremy Grant, Bruce Brown, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith. I think if you could get Walker Kessler, you could do JHS and a first for Walker Kessler. I said the most I'd give up is I would fully unprotected 2027 pick, because right now it has a 1-4 protection with Utah. So you could do something like JHS, 2029 first, and unprotect the top 4 picks of that 2027 pick for Walker Kessler, which I think would help this team tremendously. You could either start him and go back to the 2020 model, though I'm not as confident in LeBron and AD at the 4 and the 3 kind of full time. Sure. But more realistically, probably bring him off the bench and him play 24 to 26 minutes off the bench, and then 10 to 12 minutes next to AD. The rest of the time, he's manning the back line when AD's off the floor, and you have one of the best young rim protectors in the game on your team. And then the second move is getting one of the other four guys. I think Bruce Brown, guy Lakers previously targeted. I think he would help in the backcourt next to Austin as like a starting backcourt. Or they could go a couple different ways where Jeremy Grant, I think, is the closest thing to the type of guy you mentioned in terms of a big athletic scoring wing who can help you on both sides. I think he'd have to buy into a smaller role and get back to playing the defense he played earlier in his career. But he's probably the closest thing. I mean, I guess you could throw in Brandon Ingram, but I think he's at a different tier of player, and I'm not quite sure what the cost would be. But then Dorian Finney-Smith to me is probably the best like 3-and-D option, shooting over 40% on threes, really good defender. And then Cam Johnson is having a career year, and he's more of an offensive-minded shooter, kind of guy who can get hot in I don't know if quite be your number 3, but like maybe kind of trade off depending on who, they would keep Austin, and then I'm not quite sure between Rui, D'Lo, who they're keeping in that deal. But now, among those names, is there any name or two that kind of stand out?
First off, I think laying it out like that, doesn't it feel like any of those moves would just be a tremendous help to this Lakers roster? Any of those names would be. I don't know what it is, and I think it does go back to my description of a player that I'm looking for. I'm a fan of Jeremy Grant. My only question with Jeremy Grant is he's played for such bad teams for so long that, is his fire. I'm not going to question his fire or anything like that, but he's going to go from literally playing meaningful games that mean nothing to now you're asked, if the Lakers are trading for you and they're giving up assets to go get you, you got to deliver. How will he look in that environment? But Jeremy Grant's a very interesting name. I've always been a fan of Dorian Finney-Smith. I think, players like that, usually teams that go on deep playoff runs, you need a player like that, has a little bit of that kind of old school style of basketball in him. Bruce Brown's certainly a player. I love the fact that he has championship pedigree and has been a part of a team that's won an NBA championship. But identifying any of those players, it feels like you'd be hitting the refresh button with the Lakers. You feel like they would add some kind of juice. The roster has been so similar over these last couple of years, and I think it does need something. And I like the point that you made about, I remember you and I, you had come on my show, and we're having a conversation in the offseason. And when it started kind of dawning on, I don't think the Lakers are going to make a move, I think this is it, you were very vocal, like, how is that possible? And some of the names that you're mentioning now, I don't know, is the price even higher than it was? Or, you mentioned a player like Cam, like you said, he's having a career year. Well, that price didn't go down. That price went up because he's having the type of year that he's having. So all interesting names. I think I like the Dorian Finney-Smith. I like the Jeremy Grant. And I think Walker Kessler is, we've got a chance to watch him a couple times. That's a nice player. That's got a great future too.
I think all those guys can go for a first round pick. I think they might ask for 2 right now for Cam Johnson with the way that he's playing. So that like the price plus he's not really a plus. I think he's like more of an average defender. I mean, maybe a step up on Rui with the way that Rui's defended lately, but that one I'm a little less sold on because I think it might cost you upwards of 2 first round picks or a first round pick and a second, 2 seconds, whatever. Like I think the price is going to be high for Cam Johnson. Everyone else, I think, between Kessler, Grant, Brown, and DFS, you can get them for a first round pick. And I think all 4 of those guys would be either starting level guys or closing level guys and really help this team. But let's get into a couple more questions here. They got to do something. That's the thing. Question from Antonio Rojas 2849. Do you think LeBron should rest on back-to-backs and also give AD some rest games going forward for the good of the team?
I think that LeBron, real quick here, I admire LeBron. I admire he's in his 22nd year. I admire that the guy wants to probably send a message to every other NBA player out there that load manages, that look at me, I'm about to turn 40 and I'm still trying to play every single game. But I think he's got to be a little bit more strategic. It doesn't have to be, hey, this is a set rule, back-to-backs, you're out. Maybe there's 2 games at home and he doesn't have to sit out the second of a back-to-back. Maybe Lakers blew out a team or got blown out and he only played 25, 26 minutes in one of the games. So I don't think it has to be a set rule, but I think you have to be strategic with LeBron. Like, how can you not? I almost, when I saw the 82 game thing and I saw the quote a couple of days ago, I'm like, that's not a good idea for anybody. The Anthony Davis part of it, listen, are you winning a game if Anthony Davis is not in the lineup? So I think they're in a tough position where it's like,
No,
it's not,
I will,
it's not,
I will
not
save you time. No.
yeah, it's not they're not in a luxurious position where it's like, hey, you know what? Rest a couple of games. Like, we're just talking about some of these quotes that the Lakers had over the last 24 hours and losing by 41 against Miami. They're not in a spot. I think LeBron, you could be more strategic on. AD, if you're healthy, I think he's got to play.
I think LeBron probably, like, hindsight's always 2020, but probably should have rested the Utah game. Teams are different, players are different in terms of like how they view. Do you rest the front end of the back-to-back? Do you rest the second end? Do you play in the easier game? Do you play in the tougher game? I think you could go various ways with that, but I think, they probably would have lost the Utah game, I guess.
I know.
Had he not played that, he hit
Sure.
that game sealing floater late in the paint, but. With LeBron, I'm more open to the back-to-back conversation of especially if it's like multiple games in 3 games in 4 nights.
Sure.
And it's like, okay, so they play a game, they have a day off, then they play a back-to-back. I think he probably should rest one of those, the front end or the back end of the back-to-back. With AD, I'm with you. Like, I don't think they have a chance right now. So, like, maybe if Jackson and Christian come back healthy at some point in weeks,
got some
I guess.
Health, you got some size, yeah.
And you could go vintage Christian Wood of just go do your thing offensively and maybe you play some bigger lineups and try to get by that way. But right now, I think if Anthony Davis is off the floor, I also think if LeBron's off the floor, they're pretty compromised. I know the plus minus has been awful, but at the end of the day, like, LeBron does so much for the offense that I think there's some noise with the numbers. They've been getting slaughtered recently with LeBron on the floor, and I think that's kind of affected the plus minus and some of the on-off stuff. But another one from Rogue User. Hey, Jovan and Sliwa, I think the Lakers can get Sexton and Kessler from Utah. Would it be possible for Lakers to make their 2027 first from the Westbrook trade unprotected and send 2029 first top 3 protected and 2027 second for D'Lo, JHS, and Wood? I added the second, implying they eat Wood's contract, and then they add an extra roster spot for the buyout market. Thanks for all you guys do for the Lakers. Love from North Carolina. Shout out to North Carolina. So I guess in summary, that was JHS, Wood, and D'Lo with a 2029 first top 3 protected, removing the protections on that 2027 pick, and a second round pick for Kessler and Sexton. What do you think of that deal?
So your 2 first rounders are gone?
No, so right now they owe Utah that 2027 pick, but it's top 4 protected. So you just remove it's basically a first and a second and removing that protection. Plus, so you're swapping D'Lo for Sexton, and then you're doing Wood and JHS for Kessler, and then you're also adding in a first and a second and removing the protections.
Actually, to simplify that, I don't have a problem with that. I think you're. Listen, I don't think there's anybody on that roster right now that you're looking at and basically saying, "Oh my gosh." Maybe you could say Austin Reeves, and I'm okay with that. But if you told me you lost D'Angelo Russell, Jalen Hood, Schifino, and Christian Wood, I would tell you really didn't lose much. And maybe that's disrespectful to D'Angelo Russell, but
Two of those guys aren't even playing.
Two of those guys aren't even playing. I'm not the biggest D'Lo fan. I think for D'Lo's own health, he needs to go somewhere else and stop looking over his shoulder like he has pretty much since he's been a Los Angeles Laker. I think Sexton can help the Lakers, no question about it. You and I talked about Kessler being able to help, and you keep one of those first rounders. I wouldn't have a problem with that. I think you're instantly getting help in two key positions that I think you need help in, and you still have some bargaining chips to go try to make another move.
Yeah, I would take out JHS and Wood from the perspective of like evaluating the trade, and I would just view it as like you're basically trading D'Lo a first, a second, and or protected first, top 3 protected. I would fight to maybe protect, like lottery protect that, top 10 protected, something, whatever. But then removing the protections on that 2027 pick, and then you're getting back again. You're basically swapping D'Lo for Sexton and Kessler, which I think is an upgrade. So yeah, I mean I think if you talk to the Lakers, they would probably say the price is a little high there. And I think they'd again push back on either top 3 protected first or removing the protections on that 2027 pick. But I'm a little bit more aggressive or kind of more in the mode of like I think they need to do something, and I think that could be like I will say Sexton didn't look great. He was a little wild in that game, so that. But when you factor in Kessler in addition, I think that makes it clearly a trade the Lakers win from an on-court perspective. And then let's do one more question here. So this one is a long one from Syscole2831. So I'm basically going to condense it. He's saying that like people are talking about some of these older guys, like a DFS or a Valanciunas, when we talk about making a move for the Lakers, but he feels like there's a lot of pedestrian athletes on this team and that they could use some youth and athleticism.
Sure.
So in terms of when we look at how guys could fit, and like for Kessler, for example, what I love about Kessler is I think he could help you now, but he could also be a long-term solution for you at the center spot. He reminds me of, I made the Zubats comparison where he's like double guy, 2 blocks a game, efficient around the rim. And
doesn't
Lakers had that guy.
need the ball.
Lakers had that guy, and they let him go. But like Kessler's 23, he could be your starting center or a big piece of your interior for the next 7-8 years. So I think the Kessler move to me is not just about this version of the Lakers; it's about the next version of the Lakers and him being a big piece of that. But to get back to that, in terms of youth and athleticism versus more win now veteran types that are maybe a little bit older, maybe a little less athletic. How do you view that calculation in terms of potential trade targets?
I think it's a good observation. I would tell you that there are certain players, if you're in win now mode and you're giving up first rounders, they better be the right people that you know will have a significant impact on your team. But the idea, and I think it's the right, perspective when you talk about Walker Kessler, hey, I want you to be a part of this team today, but you're also going to be a part of this team. So if I'm giving up a future first rounder, you basically are filling in the future as well, right? That there's the youth that we're going to lose of picking a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old or whatever the case is. I think that's a fair perspective, but it's a fine line. If you get too many guys that are too young, they don't have any playoff experience. They don't have that kind of that veteran mindset. There's a little bit of a learning curve for that individual, and maybe that person doesn't deliver for you in the playoffs because the moment is too big or they're overwhelmed by that moment. So it's kind of a fine balancing act. It might be, you might be looking at a player that you feel like's got at least 4 years of experience in the NBA that you could say, okay, they're more comfortable with the league now than they are if they were a second-year player.
So the way I take this question is I kind of throw age out of it, and I think about like what's your goal, right? So if the Lakers are punting on the season and basically just saying we don't believe in this group in terms of contending or competing, then it becomes more of a thing of like, okay, we want younger guys. We like ideally you find Walker Kessler and a perimeter Walker Kessler in terms of a young guy who's ready to help now and can be a long-term piece. But for me, I kind of change it from like youth and even athleticism, although I think athleticism would be nice, to more like caring and playing the right way and playing hard and having a high motor. Like I think
good person to have within the organization.
The traits that like I think a guy like Bruce Brown embodies that. I think a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith embodies that. Jeremy Grant did embody that earlier in his career, and I think one point I was going to make earlier when you were talking about him was like, I kind of view him maybe, and it's a little different. So it's not an exact comparison, but a guy like Aaron Gordon, where I think before he went to Denver, you could have made similar
great comp
remarks about him in terms
Good
of
comp.
this guy's never been to the playoffs. This guy has he's wanted to be the guy in Orlando, tried to be an all-star, whatever, and he goes to Denver and he fully buys into that role. And I know everyone, obviously Jokic is goated. Murray has been a great playoff performer.
It's okay. He's a key piece.
Until recently.
Yeah.
MPJ hits the big shots and gets hot.
Sure.
KCP is the kind of plug and play 3-and-D guy. But Aaron Gordon to me has been the third
Game
best
changer.
Nugget during that stretch. He's killed the Lakers in particular, and he's been awesome for them. Now, Jeremy Grant's a little bit different because
I'm gonna give you one comp on that too. It's like, and I know this is a little bit further back, but it reminds me a little bit of Andre Iguodala. It was one of the best trades that I thought the Warriors made. They take a dude out of Philly, and he comes there and is the third, fourth guy, but kind of glues everything together. So and that's just one example, but I think that's a good point on Aaron Gordon. I like that.
So that's I think Aaron Gordon's better than Jeremy Grant, to be clear, and I'm not saying Jeremy Grant would have an Aaron Gordon type impact, but I think sometimes we look at a situation and we got like, what is the guy being asked to do? And Jeremy Grant is being asked to be the primary scorer right now in Portland or one of them. I think in LA, he could take a step back offensively and it'd be like, hey, you need to go back to rebounding and defending again. And if you are willing to do that and buy into being the third guy, sometimes even the fourth guy, maybe Dalton's on a heater, maybe Austin's got it going, and you know, you got to accept you're not always going to be the primary option on the floor. If he's willing to do that, I think you got to probably back channel it and have that sort of conversation, the text exchange or the phone call, whatever. If he's willing to do that, I think he is the type of like higher upside player that could elevate them. But for me, I look at more of the players like personality or character or sort of like their ethos in terms of whether it's a young guy or an old guy. Because I would even argue like I don't really care about age right now if I'm the Lakers, just because I'm trying to win this season and next season, and ideally you can kind of split both ways with a Kessler type where he can help you now and help you in the future. But if I'm going to prioritize one, I'm going to prioritize the present if I believe in this group. And whether they believe in this group still, we'll see in the coming couple of months based on how they play, based on if they make a deal. There's a lot of factors that are going to go into this. But Allen, you've been far too kind with your time. I appreciate you. Before we get out of here, I have one question for you.
Okay.
Because I randomly get this question when I'm doing my streams. But who do you think would win between us if we played 1-on-1 in basketball?
I like this. At this stage of my life, I'm going to put my money on you. Now here's where I think it could become a little bit more even. First off, you got you're a solid 6-7 inches taller than me right out the gate. And don't get me wrong, my whole life I've been, shorter than the rest of the pack. I've been able to kind of hold my own. But I think what we're better off doing is, maybe taking 10 threes or something like that. It's got to be something like that, because if I'm trying to go 1-on-1 with you, if I miss a shot, now I got to play defense against Jovan. I don't know how good I feel about that.
I will say you got the lower center of gravity, so you got the muscle and the strength. You got the brawn. So, but yeah, I will say though, I tore my Achilles last year, so I'm not exactly. I've only played basketball once in the last year, but I constantly get asked that question. I'm not sure why.
If you asked me to play you when at the time your Achilles was torn, I have a better chance. That's I feel more confident there.
Well, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I know.
Thank you, brother.
You were a well requested guest, so I'm sure the audience is going to love this episode. But for those who are not following you, where can they find you? And is there anything you want to plug?
Twitter at Allen Sliwa, and then on YouTube. 100% now on YouTube. Obviously was with 710 ESPN for years. Now I'm exclusively 100% on YouTube. So Hoops Talk with Allen Sliwa. I do a daily show, and then I do reaction to Lakers after every game, a little post-game show action.
Awesome, man. Well, you are paving the way with the full-time YouTube. I have taken notes on that. We will have to have you on again. It's not going to be episode 69, but this will be immortalized in the lore of Buha's block.
I did
Allen
it.
Sliwa was episode. I'm sorry to Kobe Price. He wanted to be episode 69, but it didn't quite work out, Kobe.
That's awesome.
Allen, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you all for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications so you don't miss a future video, and like and comment on this video. And then for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Friday night after the Lakers play the Hawks. We'll see what happens. Anything is possible. It feels like it could go one of two ways. But regardless of how it goes, I will be documenting it for you Friday night. I will talk to you then.